We are live, apparently. Hello, everybody. We're having a few tech issues, which is why we're 10 minutes late, but welcome to this week's episode of the Property Expert Show. If you cannot hear me, it's because we've messed up the tech. So do let me know in the comments as soon as possible. Otherwise, we could be rambling for 45 minutes with nobody tuning in. So we've got a bit of a different setup here. We're in the Aura office with our sort of studio setup. Hopefully you can hear everything. And
we are all good.
We're all good, are we? Excellent. So, welcome to this week's episode. We are here every Friday at 5 p.m. We're not here, we're normally at home, but we thought we'd try something different today because Jack was in town. And on today's agenda, we are going to be talking about, on the 12th of April 2024, if you're just tuning in, we're going to be talking about what donor house strategy is for you new investors and developers out there. This was actually how I first got into my first property development, was a donor house strategy. It definitely wasn't called that at the time. I was just buying an end terrace house and building another one next to it, but we'll find out more about that later. We're going to be looking at the valuation efficiencies and how to be as good as you possibly can be when getting your properties valued. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what collateral warranties are, the art of chasing and pushing results. I've no idea what that means. That's one of Jack's. I'm more very interested to hear what he has to say. We've made an offer for our business development manager and XP surveys. Jack's been on jury service the last week, so he's got some good analogies and some stories from that, which he's going to be talking about. I'm going to be looking at a little bit about temporary works and how to phase some of your projects and the intricacies of doing that. Jack's been frantically busy this afternoon over in East London on the Property People podcast, and he's literally just made it back for this, so another reason why we're slightly late. Refinance on St Helen's Mill, did it happen? We've been waiting for about 8 or 9 months for this to happen, so tune in to find out later if it did actually happen and what that was all about. And then I'm going to be talking about the importance of investigation works and how that can massively kind of save you lots of money with your property developments, so stay tuned for that. And as always, we will try and answer any questions that you may have. We've got a good one that's been sent in from a listener today. So yeah, what's the main gist of that one, Jack?
It's all about option contracts, agreements, doing a low deposit down and making sure that when you're buying a site at risk of planning, you're not running the risk of losing your money if the vendor pulls out. So we'll come on to that later. So in front of you, kicking off, you can actually see this is a property that we bought a few years ago now, probably 4 years ago. It was an end of terrace property that we got planning permission to build a new property on the left hand side. So we bought the existing building, which the plan was to refurbish and sell, and then the end of terrace, which we decided to obviously get the planning permission, develop it out and sell it. That is now coined a donor house because you've got an end of terrace that's donating the plot on the end. But the reason why we brought that up is Dawn in Central Suites found a donor plot, and I just gave her a quick rule of thumb of how I believe those plots now work. Essentially, I don't think a donor house works unless you buy the existing house for less than what it's worth. And what I mean by that is the original end of terrace, which is on the right hand side. If you buy that for what it's worth today in the market, your stamp duty, finance, planning, development costs, refurbishment costs will end up either breaking even or losing money. So a good rule of thumb is if you're taking on a site like that, make sure you're buying the existing property for less than it's worth so that the project works as a refurbishment for that one itself. The building plot next door has to be a bonus and a plus side, especially if you're securing it unconditionally or not de-risking the planning like a subject to planning option. But it's super difficult to make those work in modern day with stamp duty and the associated costs that I mentioned. So just a rule of thumb, if you're looking at any donor plots, make sure that end house works and stacks up on itself. And then obviously the plot is then technically free. If you're overpaying for that house, and I will stand corrected if anyone here has reviewed those deals and overpaid for an end of terrace, unless you're getting inside to like Zone 1 London, I just don't think they work.
I agree. I mean, it was kind of probably one of our worst projects, wasn't it, over the past
made a profit, but nothing to write home about.
Yeah, exactly that. Cool, very good. Sorry, lots of big tech issues, but we're getting there. Valuation efficiencies. This is one you put in, wasn't it?
Oh shit!
Valuation efficiencies.
What is that
As in
referring to?
getting your investor pack, your valuation packs in good order.
Yeah, no, it's actually got nothing to do with that.
Oh.
I mean, I could talk about something that's efficient. We in Central Suites we're buying two flips, and coincidentally the valuer was really good on the first valuation, came in at the values that we needed. That's saying quite a lot in this type of market. And we decided to make sure that we use the same valuer on the next house. So that is one efficiency. I actually can't remember. I don't know if I made any notes, but if you go back to one of our, if you go back to one of our older episodes, we actually talk about valuation packs and how we basically ensure that we've got the best chance of getting the values that we need. We always slightly overcook or play optimistic on the gross development values. We also have realistic build costs. What you don't want to happen is the valuer come in low on the build and then the bank don't lend you those funds, or high on the build and you're decreasing your net day one loan or your leverage on the acquisition, which has happened to us before. But yeah, I can't actually remember what.
Well, maybe it'll come back to you. We'll skip on. But before we skip on to the next episode, next section, just a bit of a plug here for our boardroom. There's only a couple of spaces left to join that. We've had a couple more people join in the last week, which is amazing. We want to get it to 12 people, and we're currently on 9, I think. It's a boardroom full of aspiring developers, people that have maybe done a few developments of their own. They want to grow their business to the next sort of level, be in the room with people that are out there doing really good things in the development space, want to grow their business to 8-figure revenues, doing £10 million plus of developments. And it's a shared space, so a place where we can share contacts, we can share knowledge and experience, hopefully resolve lots of issues for those developers in a group setting. So it doesn't just focus on development stuff, it also brings a lot of the stuff we've learned in business, so sales, finance, marketing, operations and talent into the space. If you're interested, get in touch.
I've got some news. Yeah, I've remembered. Let's go back. Cool. So I remembered why I put this in, and it's actually something that we've only really started doing recently. We are refinancing out one of our bigger assets in Aparo, and we tried to do this also with our site in Sunset Court with the exit bridge. Now, what I'm getting at with valuation efficiencies, if you're doing exit bridging or you're refinancing something out short term, or it's a fairly short project, there's a really, really strong likelihood that the same lenders that you refinance onto after are still going to be in the market. So what I mean by that is the site that we're exiting at the moment is going to be some form of kind of exit bridge, very short term fix, because we're refinancing it to get the existing lender off, benefit from the increase of local housing allowance, which coincidentally impacts our valuation because it's a rental-based valuation. But I know that we're going to be having to do another valuation in less than 6 months' time to refinance onto Hampshire Trust Bank as a term provider. Now, the efficiency here is I'm making sure I'm using a valuer for the exit bridge that can be used for the refinance. And the reason I say that is because, one, they know the story, they know the property. Two, if they are good, you can use them again. If they're not, you're still in the same boat. And three, you're saving on costs because they will know the asset, and their fee second time round, they've already technically got a template together, will be a lot less. So that was the efficiency. So if anyone's doing any refinances that you will need to refinance again, or going on to development products and you will need to refinance, maybe start considering who you're going to be going with to exit. See what the panel is. VAS panel is a really common one at the moment, and just sort of sounding out to make sure that you're sort of crossing the lines with the valuer that you're bringing on board so that it can be regurgitated and reused. Some banks are happy with a valuation within 6 months. Some need it within 3 months. So we might not even need to go to valuation again. We might just need it rewritten to the new lender.
Cool.
That was it.
There you go. Knew it would come back to you. Cool. So what are collateral warranties? If you've not heard of these, it's probably because you've not done taken out development finance, or you've not done any property developments. But the crux of a collateral warranty is there to protect the funder. So what happens and you can see on this image on the screen, you've got the funder, which is basically giving you your loan agreement. You are the employer, i.e. B, and then you employ lots of consultants, contractors, subcontractors below you. So the funder basically feels one step removed from actually those instructions that you've given to your contractors and your consultants. What the collateral warranties are there to do is to give the funder some assurances that if things go tits up on the project, you fail as a developer, they can step in and use those contractors and consultants as if they were instructed by the funder and not you as the developer. So it's more often than not, it's your main contractor, your architect, your structural engineer. I'd say those are the three sort of main people that the funder will want a collateral warranty from. And it's signed by you as the developer, it's signed by the lender, and it's signed by the consultant or the contractor. And it basically protects the funder against any issues whereby you as the developer fail and they have to step in and use those consultants to finish off the scheme or kind of move things forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. There you go. Any questions on that? Drop them in the comments below.
I'm sure there's a select few that are really interested in further reading with collateral warranties.
Yeah, basically just sign them and move them on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably worth saying that some consultants, some contractors may want some money or a couple £100 to sign them. You might want to check that the collateral warranty has the right PI cover, or it suggests the amount of time frame and PI cover that you've got as a consultant or a contractor. But there's really not a huge amount that will change. They're relatively standard form. You kind of sign them and away you go, basically.
Cool. So this is a very generalized one that I wanted to put in. And it's even more prevalent. As you're growing a business and you're pushing deals through and you're pushing lawyers to chase them and do things like that. I'm a massive believer, and I actually said it in the podcast with Dorian. If you don't have someone in a sales process, it will be slower. So if you're the ultimate benefit owner of something being quicker, make sure you are that person that's pushing those people forwards. And the reason I'm saying that is because I felt that this week we've been doing a lot of pushing and chasing, and that's okay. It is acceptable for you to keep tabs on things, politely go about saying, where are you at with this? We haven't heard from you for a week. That does quite often, happen. And the fundamental is you can just keep checks on things and push things forward. And that's in my nature. I hate waiting around for things. And I'm constantly pushing people to sort of give feedback. And in my opinion, it's not acceptable for someone to not come back to you, even a courtesy email within a week. So whether it's planning officers, which we've had this week, whether it's banks, which we've had this week, whether it's solicitors, which we've had this week, whether it's, potentially your team, whatever it may be, there's no harm in saying, look, I haven't heard back from you on this. Can you please provide me an update? To sort of play devil's advocate on the other side, I'm not a massive fan of people that chase me with presumptions. So I've been chased, obviously, before. And I had a contractor in Central Suites chase me by saying, I guess this isn't going ahead then. And that just had the opposite impact of, hi mate, or hi Jack, just checking in, need any help with the tender, how are you getting on? That is a chase, and that brings it to the top of my inbox, and I will reply to it. But I think that there's certain ways that you can do it badly, and there's certain ways that you can do it rightly. And in actual fact, as soon as I got that message through, I said to my brother, I was like, this is already annoying me.
And not the contractor for you.
Yeah, so yeah, make sure you do keep tabs on people. It's no good just sitting on your hands and waiting. That you have every right to have an update or a progress update, and that's in some cases, brought things forward weeks, sometimes months, just by getting on their case and holding them accountable. And that might be in an email thread with other people, other colleagues, other people in your business, and then they do sort of jump to it and respond and get going.
Nice.
I remembered that one.
Right, what's next? Offer made in our XP Surveys business. So we have for a long time wanted to bring on board a business development manager. We're not getting the sales in the business as much as we want to, mainly because we're not having the time spent from someone actually reaching out and trying to fill that pipeline and doing the sales calls with potential architects and developers. So we need to bring someone in-house, and it's something we've spoken about for a long time. We actually went on the business broadcast podcast with James Sinclair, and that was one of the key things that we took away from the conversation with him. He was very much adamant that we need to get a BDM on board to drive sales and keep that funnel full for the operations team to deliver. So we've made an offer. We've actually got a call on Monday with said person, and we're super excited to bring someone into that role. I think it'll be a game changer for the business, and it's what's needed.
Yeah, all I was going to say is we talk a lot about sort of like revenue and ops, or sales and ops, and what comes first. So in a service-based business, what that means is winning business and then delivering the business. So in our case, it's winning more surveying business, and then our team having capacity to deliver it successfully. We are currently at a stage, and our senior surveyor Oscar sent us an email today saying that our turnaround times are the fastest they've ever been. It's a little plug. Anyone need a survey, reach out, you know where we are. But that is a good time to be focusing then on boosting sales, because what that is showing is your operations is handling your existing sales inbound, and you're outputting successfully. So that's clients are happy, turnaround's good, and we have the capacity to take on much more than we are. And equally to that, if we do then exceed what we're expecting, we can then hire new surveyors. So it's all about a balance of sales versus operations. We think the better route is sales first, because that helps fund operational growth within the right capacity, because organic growth is better because systems and processes get shared within the team, and you're not going from 4 surveyors to 10 within a month. If you're progressively increasing your sales, then the team can deal with that, and you can recruit and build that culture and quality that you want to build out. So we're now at a stage where the operations can handle it. We're bringing in someone to boost the sales, which is obviously where we want to go. We want to boost both, but sort of as much in line. It's never perfect, but as much in line as possible. And it's probably worthwhile commenting, in addition to our in-house team, we have external resource that we can pick up on almost like a consultancy basis if it does get too much, to sort of take the pressure off our team and then bring someone in permanently to take up that slack.
Yeah, on that sales and operation stuff, so our business consultant now actually wrote the book called, I think it's called The Business Heart or something like that, where it's all about that struggle between the sales and operations. Like sometimes more often than not, you'll have more sales than you can cope with, and you need the operations to pick back up, and then it goes the other way, and there's always this constant balancing act that is just never in balance. And I think as a business, it will never be in balance. I think you just need to accept that sometimes there'll be big growth phases of sales, and then your operations have to pick up, and then it may be that your operations team are twiddling their thumbs a little bit because the sales team hasn't quite got there, and it's always that juggling back and forth. But that is normal as far as I'm concerned, in my experience. And if you are a new business owner or service provider, that's likely to be the case. So don't get disheartened if you're not seeing a consistent growth curve, because it's just never like that. It's always
An easy way that you could quantify that if you are a business owner is work out what quantity or quantum a surveyor, or in your case, let's say you're an estate agent, what they can actually do in revenue. So for an example, using Central Suites as an example, our sales is taking on more rooms, so more lettable rooms. Our operations is our estate management. There's a good rule of thumb that's quite general, that 100 doors is what you need per person. We're over that, so we've got one estate manager, and there is going to be a balance of the rest of the team helping systemize and manage that process until we get to a point where it's quantifiable to bring someone else in, and that's like the sales ops in a lettings business, I suppose.
Nice. Thanks, Harry Britton, for writing in on YouTube. Hi guys, love the content. Would be interesting to hear your take on the pros and cons of latent defects insurance versus self-insuring material risks. I'll be completely honest with you, definitely not something I can answer right now, because I don't even know what self-insuring material risks is. But let me get back to you next week. That could be a first question that we don't know. We'll have to go away and answer.
Like it, Harry, like your style.
Good work. Cool. Next point is about the podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube, amazing, thank you very much. If you're tuning on the podcast, thank you very much as well, and do head over to YouTube to kind of see some of the things that we're talking about. Often we'll be bringing up our projects on screen, so if you're just on the podcast, you're not going to actually get a sight of that. If you're listening on the podcast, we would really appreciate you rating us on Spotify and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It's really going to help push this podcast out there. We were rated at the 11th, I think, on propertyinsider.co.uk or best podcast of 2024 a couple of weeks ago. Can't remember. Tej was up there.
They're not that memorable.
Yeah, clearly not that memorable. Rodcast was up there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Rob.
Yeah. Crown Court.
Yeah, cool. Service. So I did jury service for the last 2 weeks, which was all fun and games. I learned that out of the 60 people that were also doing jury service, I think I was the only self-employed person there, which is difficult to manage a business when you're so preoccupied with things like that. But it's our duty to the community, and I felt that it was actually a really good experience. And I feel that even though it's got nothing to do with business and property, I feel a bit more of a well-rounded character now. But why I wanted to bring this up to today is I'm not going to go into detail about the cases, although they've been released in press and they could be talked about, and they were very interesting. But with the second case, we were a hung jury. So a jury is 12 randomly selected, then randomly selected again, members of public who basically make the decision on the court based on the evidence in the court. We went back to our deliberation room, and I'd call it a hung jury, not sure. We then decided to call it a day and sleep on it. You're not allowed to talk about it to anyone else outside the jury. And then we went back into the same room, and we were still unsure of a clear path. And I think the reason why I wanted to bring this up is the judge put a really clear analogy to us, which I can relate to in acquisitions, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So we were undecided because the evidence was somewhat lacking in some parts, and we weren't sure of the terminology of being sure and making a decision. So we had to ask the judge in front of everyone in the court if he could elaborate on being sure. And the analogy that he shared is deciding a court case is a little bit like doing a puzzle, but you don't get to see the image on the front of the puzzle, and it's your job to try and depict what that image exactly is by the puzzle pieces that you have to your sort of resources. And he said, for an example, if you're doing a puzzle with the Houses of Parliament, but you didn't know it was the Houses of Parliament, he said at the point that you're trying to piece these puzzles together and see where they match and neighbour each other, and then you build a bit of an image, and then it's very clear it's the Houses of Parliament, you've got your decision in hand. And the reason that I mentioned that is because we did a mentoring session this morning, and we talked about acquisitions, like how much work do you put in pre-offer to get to that picture. And the puzzle pieces are a planning consultant's perspective, your team's perspective, looking at Google Maps, looking at access, looking at the title, looking at covenants, looking at what the agent's saying the gross development value is. And my view is, once you have a clear enough picture to put a foot forward and you're comfortable with, and you believe that it's just going to be the final pieces to make the puzzle, is at the point that you should be putting an offer forward, but not once the puzzle is complete. Because what will happen is you will get a bid forward, you'll get outbid, and then you've wasted probably weeks trying to get a very comprehensive bid together, when in actual fact there's a lot of unknowns that you can't draw a conclusion on yet. And unlike court and the evidence being called to a head before you go into deliberation, at your point of the offer being accepted is then when you can find out all the evidence that you need to go out on that particular site. So a question for you when you're reviewing a site, or any site, or even to your process: are you doing enough work to get an offer put together, or are you doing too much work? And sometimes when I say too much work, that's two things. That's time and money. You can spend a fortune on getting a site to pre-offer. I remember, holding our hands up, and maybe it was the reason of our success on that particular deal, but the first big deal Ben and I did, we did a pre-app before we put an offer forward. Now, I would now argue that that's too much work before putting an offer forward. But, we didn't have great experience then. We didn't have, the reputation that we've built. So that might have been the thing that got it over the line for us. But if I'm bidding on an on-market deal, never in a million years would I put a pre-app in. To put that into context, we had another site where we basically got a price agreed and we're open with the vendor. We said, look, we want to do a pre-app. Here's our price. Offer got accepted. We then put the resource, funds and time into a pre-app. And the pre-app was positive, and then we went ahead and bought the scheme. But that was all done after it was agreed and before someone could gazump us or underbid us or overbid us or whatever you want to call it. But it's analysing how many puzzle pieces you should pull together on each purchase. And on a house, that might be a few pieces. On a bigger development site, that might be a bit more, but stage it at your risk of losing that time and money, because when you're looking at sites, the most important thing is your time.
Very good. Love the analogies.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah. King of analogies. That's what you are. Temporary works and project phasing. This came up this week, more so on Colney Hatch Lane, whereby your architect and your engineer will design a scheme. And again, all the puzzle pieces are there. It's all there for everyone to see. But how you phase and logistically build that project can save you tens of thousands of pounds. Different ways of doing things, different ways of sequencing things. And that's kind of where we got to on Monday on site, whereby I'd already had a conversation with the structural engineer. We redesigned the basement from the previous, so that the engineer came forward with a design. The basement was there. We had various retaining walls. We were battering back some of the ground to then reinstate a new retaining wall, but that battering back required us installing loads of temporary works above ground to cater for that. So we redesigned it whereby we have more retaining pins at basement level, less battering back. It meant that we took longer with the basement, but it didn't mean that we had to have all the temporary works at the upper levels. Now that actually, when you do a cost analysis on that, saved us loads of money and meant that the situation that we're in now, which is unfortunate, didn't cost us shitload of money. And the unfortunate event is that our party wall agreements, like I mentioned last week, have been delayed, and we've got no real end in sight on those party wall agreements. So at the moment, and based on the previous design, unless we could have moved forward with that basement works, we were basically halting works on site, because the basement works were reliant on some of the upper ground works and vice versa, whereas the redesign made it such that the basement could be delivered in a separate kind of package and the upper level works could be delivered on a separate package. So we're no longer in a situation whereby we are too concerned over the party. Obviously we want the party wall agreements to be done ASAP, but we had a meeting on site with the contractor, with the structural engineer, with myself. We walked the whole site above ground level, and there's almost all of the work that needs to be done above ground level can be done outside of the works of the basement, so they're completely separate entities. And that's just about understanding how sequencing can work, how the structural design gets put together, and basically making sure that you're pushing your contractors, your structural engineers, your architects to deliver and sort of package up your information in a way that suits you and is most cost effective. So yeah, temporary works can be really expensive, so avoid them as much as you possibly can, especially when you've got basement works going on. And then be really considerate about your structural design and how you phase your works, because it can cost tens of thousands of pounds more by doing one thing as opposed to another. Hopefully that made sense. It's quite technical. Cool.
So I've just rushed across London from, where did I go? Stratford.
Near the Olympic Village.
Yeah. Shared a tube with Rio Ferdinand, believe it or not. One of my childhood heroes. Because I had the pleasure to record the second visit of the Property People podcast with Saam Lowni from Merry Oaks Finance, but he also obviously runs his podcast channel, which is starting to get some really good traction. So if you haven't watched any of the Property People podcast, head over to his YouTube channel. He's got some really good recent interviews with Paul Higgs. Who else did he have on there recently?
Me.
He had John Howard. He might have had Ben on there. So Ben and I are actually the only people that have been on twice. And he said, what's changed in the last 2 years, Jack? And I said, well, your infrastructure for recording this is much better.
Yeah.
Because it was just done over Zoom. I'm guessing it'll be launched in a few weeks. We'll definitely share it across our channels. But definitely go check out Saam Lowni's page, which is Property People on YouTube. He's definitely upped his game. And, it's similar to us, really. The more people that watch, the better output we can do and get a setup like this. And
yeah, I definitely have significantly more grey hairs than I did 2 years ago.
So a question Sam asked me is, which, if my businesses were babies or childs, which one's my favourite business? Did he ask you the same?
He didn't. No. What was your answer?
I said we see our businesses like one company, but 4 different departments.
Mm-hmm. Very diplomatic of you.
Yeah. I don't have a favourite though.
No, they're all different in different ways. Like there's pros and cons of each.
Yeah, we've got a public school problem child. We've got the grade A intelligent kid that just sits there and doesn't bother us too much. We've got a plethora of a family.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think, he said that, maybe later on in our growth period when it's not so growy, we might have favourites, but they're also unique that we just love them for their own quirks. And yeah, some are definitely more stressful and time consuming and less controllable. And but I think we know we got into it, so whether we like the child or not, we've got to deal with it.
Just like normal children, right? You can't really put them back inside.
I used to say that to my dad when he used to be telling me off. I said, well, it was your idea.
And on that note, if you want to come and visit Jack and myself at our sites in Marlow, Tame and Abingdon, get signed up to our site tour day on the 26th of April. It's a Friday. We're going to be there from 12 till 5, spending about an hour to an hour and a half at each project, explaining more about the project, how we secured it, how we financed it, how we funded it, how we've phased it through the planning process, any issues and difficulties we've had with the planning process, everything from top to bottom. So if you're interested in coming along, you can go to bit.ly/XP-site tour-2024. And I think it has to be all in capitals, XP Site Tour 2024 in capitals.
Or just DM us if you're having any issues.
Actually, we got Christina, our marketing manager, to set up a page on our website. So if you go to the blogs on our website, there is a page now set up with all of the relevant detail. You can sign up to a Google form, which gives us all of your information and tells you a little bit more about the day. So yeah, do tune into that. Love to see you there. Refinance at St Helens Mill. We've been talking about this for about 9 months. We went through a process of 6 months with the Yorkshire Building Society, which was very, very stressful. They made us jump through loads of hoops. We spent about $3,000 on reports, showing why and how much it would cost us to get our EPC grades up to a C or above, and then fundamentally went to credit and they said, we're not interested in lending to you after 6 months, which is ludicrous. They did, however, pay us $2,000.
We're still challenging it. So they paid us back for the EPC assessment.
Yeah.
And now we're challenging to get the valuation paid for as well.
Cool, nice. So not enough to warrant the additional 6 months that we've had to wade through in terms of interest rate hikes and whatnot. But fundamentally, really good news today. We have finally refinanced with Kent Reliance. There's a big chunk of money in our bank account today, which we don't see very often, which was great. And yeah, we've got about £1 million worth of equity sitting in this project. It actually won Property Deal of the Year in 2022 at the Property Investor Awards.
And the Developers Club.
And there is actually a video on that on the Property 118 website of being interviewed by Elizabeth.
Yeah. So on YouTube, Property 118, there's an interview there that you can go and get a deep dive into. Or it's like an informal interview, really, our backgrounds, but then also a deep dive into the deal. So I suggest going over there to look at it.
Maybe we do a deep dive on a call in the next couple of weeks.
Let's
on
do
that deal. Now it's finally secured and
done,
refinanced and out of the way. But yeah, really great success today. Really happy with that. Big relief to get that one over the line.
I came out of the podcast earlier and had a missed call from the broker and the old lender, and I was like, oh, what's happened here? Rang Matt and he was like, well done. I was like, I didn't even know it's happened.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Money in the bank account. Yeah, super happy with that. If you want to know more about working on historic buildings like the old Maltings, it isn't a grade 2 listed building. It is set within lots of grade 2 listed buildings and does have a lot of heritage value being an old mill house, but there are plenty of other grade 2 listed properties and heritage assets that I've worked on from an architectural perspective, and we've also worked on from a development perspective, and I'm going to be sharing some of those insights at Brendan Quinn's 14th year anniversary property networking event on Thursday the 25th of April in the London Bridge Hotel. We're going to be joined by Claire Truman, who's a heritage consultant, loads of experience working with those types of assets. There's going to be a 360 development and planning panel. So we've got Peter Higginbottom from a planning consultant perspective, Sam Lowni from Merry Oaks from a finance perspective, and then Rudy from RFB Legal, who's going to be giving us lots of insights from a legal perspective, being a property solicitor. So do let me know, DM, if you want some tickets to Brendan's event on the 25th of April.
Claire actually did an initial report on St Helens Mill for us.
Yeah, she's worked on numerous of our projects, isn't she? Was she working with you on your?
She's done loads, and she's did Besselsley Road, East St Helens Street, which was built in the 1400s.
Very good.
Wallingford.
Yeah.
Hemdean. So she does she does a lot of Central Suite stuff.
Cool.
And Mayot's Road, I think.
How's your grade 2 listed property?
Joyous.
They're fraught with issues, but some of those issues you can't see until you start uncovering things. And the advice I always give is just have a healthy contingency, because it will get swallowed.
I reckon our contingency is on a 150k bill, probably 20%.
Yeah,
and it would be more if we didn't have the relationship with the builder that we do have. But yeah, they are a bit of a nightmare. Mm-hmm. I swear every time we buy one and finish it, I'll be like, never again. But then we've had East St Helens Street, which is the oldest property that I've ever even walked in from a investment perspective. Mm. I've been in a few pubs that are older than that.
Yeah.
And it's easy, breeze.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it does depend on the actual asset itself and what's happened historically. Also, are there any damp or undermining issues like you've had with the structure? And sometimes those things you just can't see until you get stripping a few things out.
My wife likes going into these properties because she thinks she's a ghost medium.
Right.
She goes in and goes, "There's definitely a ghost in here."
And she's American, but
yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Oh.
So This I wanted to bring up because we've started on the old maltings, and there's a lot of history with the property and a lot of investigation works that we carried out. And having done those investigation works, I can absolutely guarantee, I reckon it's probably saved us the best part of 50 grand by getting a true understanding of what the site looks like, how it's built, what the foundations are doing in certain areas of the property, what the floor build-ups are, what the wall build-ups are, what the roof build-ups are. And I was going to actually show, but from a tech perspective, I just don't have it in me to figure out how to do it. Show the report that we had provided. It was a 38-page report. It was done by one of our contractors. Really, really well put together. Shows where the trial pits were that they did from an excavation perspective. Shows all the floor build-ups and wall build-ups throughout the property. And the image that you can see on screen basically shows you some of the snippets and the photos that they took. So the idea of it is that your architect and your structural engineer has to make loads of assumptions about a property if they don't know what these wall build-ups are, what the floor build-ups are. Those assumptions will cost you a lot of money, because what's going to happen is they'll make assumptions, that is what they'll put on the drawings, and then it's going to go to tender, it's going to go through the tender process, the contractor is going to get on site, they start opening things up, stripping out works, and only then do they find the issues. That then has to go back to the architect, back to the structural engineer to resolve those issues. One, the contractor is going to be putting a nice margin on those requests for information and the contract variations, if there are any. It's going to sap time from your engineer and your architect, and they're probably going to charge for that time. It's going to delay things because the contractor is going to want to know the solution to those problems. And all of that really can add up to significant amounts of money. Whereas if you spend a couple of £1,000s up front getting either your builder, or there's people out there that can do these types of investigation assessments, if you spend that money and time up front, all of those problems go away. Not only do you get a more concise and consolidated package from your architect and engineer, but the cost that you get from your contractor, which is the most important thing, will be more resilient and more robust, because they're actually quoting against things that we know. Uncertainty and things that you uncover that you don't expect on property developments are the things that are going to hold you up and cost you the most. So the more you can limit those, the better. And doing investigation works like this, like you see on the screen, are the things that are going to help you save those monies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess if anyone wants to see that investigative works, we can share it out.
Yeah. It's we've got drone footage.
I'll tell you what, we'll print it off ready for the site day.
Yeah, good shout. We'll do that. There's drone footage as well, so we know exactly where there are slip tiles, where there's gutters that need clearing. All of that stuff, again, you're not getting to site for your contractor to then bring that up. You know about it, you can plan for it, you can cost it. And contractors, if there are variations through the project, they're going to be putting way more margin on it than they would from day one. If they know about it from day one, you're sort of packaging that up as part of the whole wider tender process. Any unexpected things throughout the build, the contractors to a certain degree got a bit of carte blanche to just be like, well, this is how much it's going to cost to fix it. And at that point, you're not going to bring in a separate contractor to kind of resolve some of these issues. Yes, there's an element of, if you've got a QS on board or you're experienced like us, to push back and say, well, no, your rates for doing this over here when we signed up the contract are X. Why are you now charging us X times 50%? So, if you're new to development, you're not going to know what to push back on. And we had this with an Aura project where it was the sort of contractor where they're going to come in the cheapest. They are the cheapest. The homeowner obviously wanted to go for the cheapest because they're the homeowner. That's what they wanted. Our advice was, don't go for the cheapest because you're going to get stung. And day one, when they were digging the foundations, they came back with an £8,000 variation because the foundations weren't as expected and as per the structural engineer's design, blah, blah, blah. So these types of contractors that come in stupidly low to win a project are instantly looking for contract variations so they can bring their contract value up and make more money. The homeowner was very lucky in that situation because we knew that the rates they were trying to charge were outrageous. The time frame and the actual labour going into to resolving that issue was double what it should have been, and we got that £8,000 variation down to £2,500. But if you're a homeowner or a newbie developer, you don't know to push back, you don't know to question it, you don't know what you're questioning it against, then it's going to cost you a shitload of money. So yeah, do some investigation works, get it right whilst you're in the design phase, and it's going to save you a huge amount of money in the long run.
I will say on that cheapest quote, we've obviously built a good relationship with Richard, our builder in Abingdon, and he was the cheapest, but he doesn't take the piss with any variations. He's very reasonable. So do take, on smaller stuff, do take that with a pinch of salt. So we've got a question in. Ben, do you want to read and I'll answer?
Yeah, so question is from, who was the question from?
Robert Simpson.
No idea who that is. I was looking into whether the non-refundable deposit can be low, so it's like an option fee, and that terms can be worded so that there is limited financial liability if the seller pulls out. No loss of opportunity, stroke market value, full risk. May be limited to the deposit plus seller's reasonable legal fees incurred. So overall, a bit like an option, but the deal is much further down the line. If the completion is delayed, what sort of delay is possible, and can the buyer then have a provision to bring the completion forward, i.e. they have obtained planning, stroke finance, etc. and want to close? Is there a risk that exchange triggers any tax charges like SDLT or seller's CGT, or can those be limited to completion? Okay.
Cool. I'll tackle the first one. Stamp duty and taxation is charged on completion because the property isn't complete until that's happened. Now I'll deal with contractual stuff, and I'll try and lead into delay completions and things like that at the same time. So we recently kicked off the ground with a new lawyer, a new solicitor, I suppose. And we were talking, and they kept saying about how good options are, and options offer so much flexibility, and options are great. But I think there's a very good place for exchange delay completion contracts, or conditional contracts, which I also call them. So that might look like, we will buy this subject to planning, so you can exchange and then complete further down the line. Where I believe options are good is if you're doing land assemblies, because it's very difficult to get six sellers to sell their garden, 6 purchase contracts, and you exchange on all 6, which means 6 sets of searches and surveys, 6 sets of contracts, etc., 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 if you don't achieve the planning. So I think options are great for that type of structure of a deal. I think if you're confident in the planning, which you should be if you're going ahead and buying it subject to planning, a conditional contract is actually better. The reason being, if you're taking on, for an example, Marlow, using a project as an example, it's a grade 2 listed property, we agreed subject to planning. We managed to agree just £5,000 as our exchange fund, and that was also refundable if we didn't get planning or if the seller pulled out. Technically, the seller can't pull out because it's an exchange of contracts. So you have a long stop date for the planning, but we managed to agree £5,000. That I always use the same reason to argue that down. I say, if you want this to be as quick as possible and as seamless as possible, let's put all of our funds into the planning to speed that up and make sure that the planning is as good as it can be, and then we'll all be closer to the result of the completion of the sale. Sometimes you get pushed back. Sometimes they still want 10%, and the way that I'd then renegotiate that is maybe a fee per month or a lower fee with a cost per month, for an example. But you can get exchange fees down even as low as 1% or even lower, 0.25%. So that's a conditional purchase. Now, we like doing conditional purchases on acquisitions that we're fairly confident in the planning because, one, we've already done the searches and surveys, and our solicitor has looked at the nuances of the site and the titles, which may change what you put in for planning. So if you've just got an option and you haven't done the searches and surveys and your lawyer hasn't looked at the restrictions or covenants or access on the site, you might go in for 8 houses and find out there's a restriction on access and a covenant saying that you can't build any more than 3 houses on there. But with a conditional purchase, you've done all that work up front pre-exchange, so that all that work is done. but that can be messy if it's multiple gardens or multiple sites or multiple fields or whatever it may look like. Another place where I feel that options are well suited is larger speculative sites and larger plots of land, because quite frankly, if you're buying a site for 6 million that's a plot of land, you don't really want to be negotiating how much the exchange fee is on that, and also there's not much inherent value on that land until you get to the planning. But if it's a building, you could argue there's value there. Now coming on to timeframes, essentially with an option you want it as long as possible, and similar to a conditional contract you want that as long as possible. They have to draw a long stop completion date. You have to set a completion date on exchange. It can't be open-ended, but where we do keep it open-ended is that if there are any timeframes that we need to abide by. So for an example, with Tame, we've got an overage condition in with the prerequisite owner, and in those conditions we have to submit pre-app by a certain time, we have to submit full planning application by a certain time, and the way that we date those is once we've had feedback from the council of the previous application. The reason we do that is because we're not in control of the council, we're only in control of what we put forward to the council. So essentially, if you do have timeframes that you're stipulating in any contract or option agreement or purchase agreement, make sure that it's, for an example, within 3 months of feedback of the pre-app, you will submit the full planning application. That leaves it a lot more flexible, and hopefully make sure that you're not coming up against timeframes that you can't comply by. As far as timeframes go, it's kind of like the longer you can agree with a vendor, the better, because you can get your planning, you can get your ducks in a row. Planning is taking a lot longer than it used to. You know, we've had planning applications in for a year for something very, very simple. So if your purchase contract isn't amenable to the planning sort of process and how long that takes, you may find that you spent a small fortune on planning and can't actually still buy the site because you've gone past or surpassed that date. Which is very advisable to put extension agreements within your option agreement or contract, so that if the planning's looking good, it's just taking a while, you have the control to extend that if you need to. We often in our conditional contracts stipulate that we have the right to take the planning application to appeal, and in that event we can extend the contract too. And that obviously buys you a lot more time. Not saying that you might want to run the appeal process, which could be 9 months, subject to where, you know, what the deal is. But you then might be able to, because you've got the power to do that, renegotiate the contract to do a new application and renegotiate new timeframes sort of concurrently with the appeal process. Anything else to add?
No. Good. How about the CGT stuff?
So stamp duty and CGT is triggered on completion. Mm-hmm. So if the funds are held by employer's agent, which is the solicitor, they're not getting the funds anyway. So that is triggered on completion. So you will not trigger that on a conditional contract or on an option. What they may have to consider is if the option fee is lumpy, for an example, 100 grand. Difference between an option and a conditional purchase is quite frequently your exchange funds on a conditional purchase sit in solicitor's account. An option agreement, sometimes the fee is released to the seller, and they have to deal with their own tax position. But it's obviously good for you to understand that, to negotiate your package to them, because they don't want to be paying a load of tax. But then again, if it is a larger sum, you know, they should be taking a view on that because they're getting some money up front.
Very good.
Good.
Anything else?
No, all good from me.
Cool. Well, on that note, we will finish this week. If you've got any questions for next week, do let us know. I will take Harry's question away and hopefully bring that back next week. So tune in to hear about latent defects insurance and self-insuring material risks. Do tune in on the podcast, share it with just one person, that would really help, and rate on Spotify and review on Apple Podcasts, and see you again next week at 5 p.m. on Friday. Cheers.